Thank you, Gustavo. I'm gonna get my screen shared here for all of you folks. Give me a second. I'm just gonna pull up my presentation. Okay. So, oops, sorry. So yeah, today I'll be going over a little bit of the question formulation technique. That's sort of the activity that we'll be partaking in. And how we can use that as community engagement in natural disasters, especially when working with community stakeholders, especially emergency managers, community planners, and people in like emergency response. The example we're going to be working through today is something that I developed here as part of a project that I was working with the Cascades Volcanic Observatory and Oregon decision makers, which included emergency managers, community planners, Forest Service managers, and some researchers. Unfortunately, this project didn't go ahead just because of the timeline sort of discrepancies and when I was going to graduate and things like that, but it was pretty successfully received by all of those teams. They really enjoyed at least hearing about the project and would like to implement sort of projects like this in the future. So hopefully there's an opportunity in the future to sort of do that type of thing. So we're going to be working on the question formulation technique, but I'm also going to be talking a little bit about storytelling and how that can be used as community engagement, and really this twofold approach on how we use the question formulation technique and storytelling in planning with our community stakeholders around common goals and objectives of what they want to see happen in their communities. So what is the question formulation technique? Well, this is basically developed by the Right Question Institute. It's essentially just a structured method for creating and improving questions. It turns these complex types of creative, focused, and reflective thinking into something which is easy to use and can be used as a repeated technique if you need to in order to really obtain those goals and objectives of whatever you're doing, such as updating a coordination plan, or maybe you're trying to figure out a evacuation drill or do some sort of evacuation scenario for a town. And it asks questions related to a topic or statement or relatable sort of subject that might not come up on a day-to-day basis. So in natural disasters, these don't typically happen every single day. So the questions around those, especially for emergency response and emergency managers, is, they might have questions that only pertain prior to, during, or after a natural disaster. And so those are the types of questions that we're trying to elicit from those stakeholders. Okay, so the first part of doing the question formulation technique is to start with something called a cue focus. So this is the stimulus for jumpstarting questions. It's the focus of the question formulation. So this could be a statement, it could be a phrase, an image, a video, any sort of thing that sort of gets your participants sort of engaged in the content around the subject matter that you're trying to sort of find a goal for. It doesn't have to be a question, of course, so it could be any of the things listed in that second point there, but you want to elicit questions from whatever it is that you're giving to your participants. So this is what we're going to do. So here's the first rule to question formulation technique, is that I'm going to give all of you a statement. And in that statement, I'm only going to give you the statement. We're going to break you out into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you a participant guide so that you can just type out as many questions as possible to that statement. You're going to ask as many questions as you can. I'll probably give you about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer to do this. You want to not discuss, don't judge, or ask questions about someone's question. You literally are just asking questions and writing them down. You want to write them down exactly as they're stated. And then if there's somebody makes a statement, try to reword that into a question, if you can. So just for sake of it, and I don't know where all my tools are, so give me a second here. Okay, the joys of, sorry, I'm just going to stop share for a second. So I'm going to share the participatory guide for you today. If you go to this Google Doc, if you have troubles, just let me know if you have any issues opening it, but you should be able to open it and then you should be able to type within it. And what you'll see is you'll see all of the steps listed up until the discussion point, so that you'll have the discussion point in front of you, so you don't have to keep coming back to this room and asking. So I'm just going to share my screen again. And so here is the question, or here's the statement. So in the early hours of December 5th, the USGS detected a sudden increase in seismic activity and deformation in Mount Hood and have increased the alert level to warning or red. An eruption occurs at 2:30 p.m., forming an ash column and several pyroclastic flows. So this is the statement. We're going to put you into breakout rooms, and I'll give you about 5 to 8 minutes or so to, with your group, come up with as many questions as you can. So does anyone have any questions about the question formulation technique so far?
Hi, Ashley. This is Barb. Thank you for giving us a moment to ask questions. Do you want us to type the questions into that same document?
Yeah, so make a copy of that document, and then as a group, you can all just type into that document, or you can have someone act as the recorder and just type questions as people are asking them. That's just your working group document. So you'll keep coming back to that document during this exercise. That's a great question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to make it easier, we're gonna have 2 breakout rooms. Is that a good size? Okay.
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
So we're gonna have perfect. So we're gonna have two sections in the Google Doc, and breakout room 1, breakout room 2, and then you can write the questions for your specific group.
That will work too. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna create the breakout rooms now, and you should be able to join. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Okay. Perfect. How did that go? How did everyone feel about answering or asking questions? Was there any part that was particularly difficult? Like, were you able not to judge or discuss or anything?
In our group, which was breakout room 2, what was really cool was how one question led to another. Like people were like, oh yeah, and then it's like everything kind of built on each other, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. That is definitely a good way to elicit more information out of just a blanket statement. So very nice. I'm not sure why I have this slide. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so the whole purpose of that part of the question formulation technique is that by creating those questions and then numbering them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it helps you think divergently. So everyone's got different goals, different objectives. They need to know different information, especially if you have someone like from the Forest Service. They're going to have different questions that come up for them than maybe someone who is in emergency management, or someone who's, you know, a mayor or on the city council. They're going to have much different questions about that eruption occurring. So it gets you thinking about where everybody's sort of head is at and how they initially deal with disasters. So the second step here is to improve your questions. So we're going to go back to our question set, And questions can be either open-ended or closed-ended. So closed-ended questions are questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no. They don't need any other explanation. It's just, if you're asking a question, it's, can I answer it with a yes or no? And then open-ended questions they require a lot more information that you have to put into the answer rather than just a yes or no. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our document. We're just going to mark our questions with either a C or an O for closed-ended or open-ended. So let's just identify which of those questions are closed-ended and open-ended.
All right. Okay. The same rooms are gonna be open now.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone.
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. All right. So how did you feel about that portion of the assignment? Was it hard? Was it pretty easy to identify which questions were open, which were closed? Kind of in the middle. Some of them were easy. Some of them you thought maybe might be trickier. Yeah. So gauging on how many you had closed versus open. So breakout group number 1, we had a lot more open questions than closed questions, which was good. And we talked about how that's really good because you want to be eliciting information out of, if you don't know something, to elicit information that is going to require a much more detailed answer rather than just a yes or no. Unless, a yes or no will suffice. But for the most part, you want to be able to word your questions in a way which you'll get much more detailed answers out of them. And so it's a way to think about, am I asking a question which is can just be answered by yes or no, or am I asking a question which I'll be able to get the right amount of information that I need in order to make a decision based off of what's happening. So this just allows, especially if you're working in tabletop exercises for those groups, those different lenses coming from different government groups and different decision-making groups, to sort of decide whether or not they have the same goals, the same objectives, and whether what they're asking is actually going to get at the root of what is the most pressing matter, which might be public safety. It could be, saving infrastructure. It could be, evacuation, whatever it is. These questions sort of draw out what information is most pertinent to us and what do we need to know in order to do our jobs, essentially. So then this is the high level work with their questions, and you can identify how different types of questions elicit different types of information and answers. So the last step of this is to prioritize the questions. So prioritizing questions brings participants back to the central objective. So again, if you have a lot of different decision makers and stakeholders who have different goals and objectives on what they want to do during a volcanic eruption or other natural disaster, you want to have them sort of think about, what is the main goal? What are the main objectives? Is public safety the main objective? Is it your fire response team, if it's a wildfire? Is it making sure that your fire team is safe? So you really want to draw out what the most important goals and objectives are for the entire group. So it's like a whole community sort of planning session for them to think about. So what you're going to do now is go back to your questions. You and your group are only going to choose 3 questions that you consider the most important. So discuss with your group about why the 3 questions that you're choosing are the most important and why you think they're the most important, and what sort of answers what would the answers look like in terms of getting information that you need to know in order to make a decision. So imagine you're an emergency manager or a community planner, and you need to know which questions are the most important. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes on this, and then we'll come back as a group and we'll sort of talk about storytelling to finish up.
Okay, I think everyone's back, actually.
Unmute. Okay, There we go. So now you've just taken a really big step to help participants think convergently. So where we were all in this sort of dispersed, I'm over here, I'm thinking about this, I'm over here, I'm thinking something different. Now we've had to come together and think about, okay, this eruption is happening. What is the most important information that we need to know right now? And so curious to know, like, did anyone find this part particularly difficult, or did you kind of have a debate over which questions were the most important? It was pretty easy.
Yeah, I think it was it naturally was how we were thinking of questions almost. Like, first is like, what is the immediate impact to humans and property? And then next is like, okay, response. And then the last is like an important question. But more important, not as important about like bodily harm. It's more like economically harm to the like air travel and stuff like that. And the other questions kind of fell below those, of course. So that's why I picked the top 3 in that order.
Nice. Very cool. We kind of had a similar one. There was one, our third question was, we were trying to decide between how big is the eruption and do we have any evacuation plans? And it sort of through our discussion and sort of asking each other questions through it, we discovered that, you know, how big is the eruption is probably more a question that the scientist in us wants to know. And so, you know, that would be something that maybe researchers would be more concerned about, whereas something like, do we have evacuation plans in place is more of like a decision maker. That would be the one that would be more immediate to them. So, so it does get your participants thinking about, okay, I see where you're coming from, but also like as a whole community, what is the biggest thing that we have to tackle? So again, you're just thinking convergently. So the expected outcomes for the QFT is that you've elicited all these different questions and answers. You've engaged the participants in a way to start thinking about the importance of volcanic hazards in this case, but any natural hazards. It depends on what you work in. And you've helped them identify what they don't know. So now they know what they don't know, which is a good thing, because it helps them identify the information that they need or the areas in which they're going to have to get help in obtaining that information. So now you've got them fully engaged in this process. I'm kind of keeping an eye on time because I know Gustavo's got to take off here pretty soon. The next portion of this is storytelling, and I'm just going to give you some very broad highlights on storytelling. And then if you have questions afterwards, I'd be happy to answer them. But basically, we're going to use storytelling in this case. So now we've engaged all of our stakeholders in thinking about questions around an eruption at Mount Hood. So now we're going to use the storytelling portion. And there's tons of research around storytelling in workshops being very beneficial because one, they place ideas in a slightly broader context. So it helps relate that story to different entities, different individual lenses. So the Forest Service is going to have a different experience with this story than someone from emergency management, for example. It creates a durable memory. We tend to remember things in context rather than in isolated facts. So when we can relate to a story, it helps us remember all the information better. It puts all of your participants into the narrative itself. And so it makes it personally meaningful to them and the work that they're doing and much more meaningfully impactful. And then it drives engagement because you would at the moment, as you're going through the story, they would have maps on their tables and they would be marking and going through the story with you as you're going through this. So I'm just gonna sort of like very quickly go through this story. Basically, we start with that eruption that occurs on December 5th, but of course there would be precursory activity. We show them a timeline, we tell them what each of the symbols means, and we go through what sort of that precursory activity might look like. We give them different scenarios, such as an eruption. We'd show them pictures along with that. We have a hazard map that we would show. We show the extent of the hazard. They would draw that on their map. They might have to ask themselves what towns are around here, where are the main highways, what are the main exit routes. But we do that for all of the things, all of the hazards that we would expect to see at Mount Hood. during this type of eruption. There might be water treatment plants that they have to be concerned about. We can highlight those. We can say why ashfall is dangerous to electric power lines. So as you're going through the story, you're also teaching them about the hazards. And so they learn that in the context within their region. You can show them videos of pyroclastic flows, some of the damage that occurs from that, why they're so dangerous. Lahars, of course. Of course, Mount Hood has had past lahars that have occurred, so you can put that in context for them and tell them this is how the extent of where these lahars would go. You keep going along the timeline. You might extend this out, giving them a timeline of how long the eruption is going to last, or activity might go dormant for a little bit and then pick up again. And maybe you get then a dome created at Mount Hood, which is a likely type of eruption that they'd have there. You tell them what seismic activity would be showing up, how the USGS would relate that information. You show them videos of dome growth. This is from Mount St. Helens, but it might be something similar to that. You have a lava dome eruption. You then get, pyroclastic flows again. You might get lahars again. And so you can sort of show them what that looks like. Puts it all in context for them. And then at the end, you kind of say, well, this is a long-term eruption. So this intermittent activity continues for 3 years, hypothetically. So now you have $2 billion in infrastructure destroyed, and any displaced residents have been displaced since beginning of eruption. Now they have to think about, that's a long-term relocation for a lot of residents. What would we do in that scenario? What would that look like? So then you'd wrap up sort of your storytelling and QFT session, because now you have them engaged. You've developed an understanding of how volcanics impact their communities. So you might ask them what surprised them. What do you see are the similarities and differences between volcanic hazards and maybe some of the other hazards that they deal with, like wildfires, for example, because their communities are probably more worried about wildfires than they are from an eruption from Mount Hood. But how do you engage those same stakeholders in thinking about volcanic hazards, and how do they cross over with some of those other hazards that they have to deal with? And so that's sort of how the expected outcomes come out of storytelling in QFT. So you help them develop the understanding for why thinking about volcanic hazards is really important, but then how does it align with some of their other hazards as well? So that's basically all I have. I know it was a whirlwind through the storytelling, but it's a really effective method. There's tons of research on it that it's been shown, especially the storytelling portion, QFT as well. I just decided to integrate both of them, and it seems to be highly received, like I said. So, here's just a couple of questions I would encourage you to take away today. Think of it, using it in your communities, in your own research, if you're working with community members. And then how does this sort of method put into context how volcanic hazards relate to other hazards, and how people, your participants, your stakeholders, can then envision their own role in a volcanic eruption. So that's it from me.
Awesome, thank you, Ashley. Yeah, sorry we are finishing up kind of early today's webinar because I quite literally have to take off. But thank you so much, Ashley, for being our last speaker for this fall webinar series. This exercise was really cool. Kind of shows you how to be aware of the kind of questions you're asking. So very nice. And as I said before, we are going to send you a poll that we'll be very happy if you can fill it out, so you can provide us some feedback about this webinar series, and expect to have or expect to get some announcement for our spring webinar series coming up in the next few months. There's a question in the chat, Ashley. Info on AGU be shared.
Barb, is that for what is that for?
I
Mhm.
thought you were organizing a poster session at
Oh,
AGU.
yes, we are. Yeah, maybe we can get that information from Melissa, Gustavo, and send that out to as part of the registration poll, to see if people heads up.
Yeah,
Great,
and
thank
I'm
you.
gonna make sure to have that also included in maybe the volcano listserv. Since
Nice. Yeah. Thanks, Barb, for the reminder.
Great. Well, thank you
Cool.
both and safe travels, Gustavo.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, you're gonna be hearing from me soon about our next webinar series in the spring.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.